For over 3 years, Japan's military strategy had rested on a critical, yet flawed assumption that American industry was too slow, too soft, and too geographically distant to wage a sustained, high-intensity naval war across the vast Pacific. The initial success at Pearl Harbor and the rapid expansion across Southeast Asia in late 1941 had reinforced a belief in the spiritual superiority of the Japanese warrior, Yamato Damashi, over American material strength. Intelligence officers in Tokyo consistently underestimated the speed of U.S. mobilization, reassuring the high command that losses inflicted on the Americans could never be replaced fast enough to match Japan's own carefully managed fleet deployments. This created a strategic bubble, a carefully maintained illusion that the war would either be decided quickly or that attrition would favor Japan due to a supposed lack of American resolve. This fundamental miscalculation of their enemy's industrial capacity was the poison pill baked into Japan's entire war plan, and it was a bubble that was about to be violently and decisively burst in the autumn of 1944. The reality began to pierce this strategic illusion in October 1944, just before the climatic battle of Leyte Gulf. Japanese submarine commanders, the advance eyes of the Imperial Navy, started transmitting frantic and desperate messages back to Tokyo. These messages contained observational data that defied every official intelligence estimate. Through the hazy optics of their periscopes, they were witnessing the impossible. The American Pacific Fleet advancing toward the Philippines was not just large, it was a phenomenon, a military armada so immense that its columns of ships stretched beyond the horizon, appearing to be an endless procession of steel. They reported sighting not dozens, but hundreds of vessels, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and an almost unbelievable number of aircraft carriers. The sheer scale was a profound psychological shock, contradicting years of assurances that the U.S. could only muster a fraction of this power. These communications were the first physical evidence confirming that the industrial giant Japan had provoked had finally fully awakened. The strategic goal of the Japanese counterattack at Leyte Gulf, codenamed Shogo, Victory Operation, was to strike a decisive blow against the American landing force in the Philippines, crippling General MacArthur's invasion. Admiral Takeo Kurita, leading the Japanese center force, expected to encounter a strong but manageable American fleet, based on assessments of approximately 40 major U.S. combat vessels, primarily screening the transports. The reality was a psychological tsunami. Kurita's forces steamed directly into the operational area of the U.S. 3rd and 7th Fleets, comprising well over 200 vessels, including a staggering complement of nearly 100 carriers across various types, from the immense fleet carriers to the smaller, numerous escort carriers. This 5-to-1 disparity in sheer ship count was impossible for the Japanese to comprehend, instantly rendering their intricate, multi-pronged attack plan strategically hopeless. The Japanese admirals had prepared for a chess match, but found themselves facing a relentless, overwhelming wave of industrial warfare. The full, terrifying realization of this imbalance was brutally demonstrated by the fate of the Japanese battleship Musashi. Launched in 1940, the Musashi and its sister ship, Yamato, were considered the pride of the Imperial Fleet, massive, heavily armored, and widely believed within the Japanese Navy to be virtually unsinkable. Its strategic value was incalculable. Yet, during the battle, the Musashi did not fall victim to a surprise torpedo attack or superior Japanese tactics. It was simply overwhelmed by sheer, unrelenting numbers. Wave after wave of American carrier aircraft, launched from dozens of platforms, delivered an endless torrent of ordnance. Before it finally succumbed and capsized, the Musashi absorbed an astounding 17 torpedoes and 19 bombs. This destruction was the moment the physical reality of American mass production trumped Japan's belief in qualitative excellence. It proved that in this war, the enemy didn't need superior tactics, they just needed more bombs than the target had hull to absorb. As the battle raged, the frantic communications from the operational zone painted a picture of not just fighting, but utter helplessness. While official reports spoke of fierce engagements, the intercepted and decoded messages revealed the Japanese admiral's true internal state. The words were not of tactical failure, but of strategic disbelief. Messages to fleet commanders included phrases questioning intelligence estimates. "We have encountered a force several times larger than anticipated, and their air groups are an endless chain. Our fighter cover is non-existent." Rear Admiral Toshiyuki Yokoi's staff, when assessing the scale, used language usually reserved for natural disasters, describing the American fleet as a steel typhoon. This was the devastating moment where the top leaders realized their entire strategic premise, that the US fleet could be beaten by quality and surprise, was fundamentally and irrevocably false, superseded by the overwhelming tangible evidence of American industrial might in the 1940s. Back in Tokyo's deep underground command centers, a chilling picture was being compiled by intelligence officers forced to reconcile reality with propaganda. The flow of desperate field reports, coupled with updated estimates from captured American sources, necessitated the creation of a highly classified document, which one officer later termed the Assessment of Material Reality. This report systematically dismantled every strategic assumption Japan had held since Pearl Harbor. It moved beyond ship counts and focused on pure industrial metrics. The numbers were not just bad, they were catastrophic. This document laid out the grim, factual truth. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was not an isolated defeat, but the inevitable consequence of a 3-year-long war lost on the factory floor. A war that Japanese military leaders had been blind to until it physically appeared on the horizon in October 1944. The core of the Assessment of Material Reality was an unflinching comparison of the United States and Japan's industrial output. The most shocking figures were in steel production, the backbone of any modern navy. The American capacity for manufacturing steel essential for building ships, tanks, and aircraft was revealed to be over 11 times greater than Japan's. For aircraft, the output disparity was approximately 4-to-1, a gap that was widening monthly. The report emphasized that while Japan struggled to repair damaged ships and planes due to resource scarcity, American shipyards were achieving engineering miracles. They were documented as completing a new Essex-class aircraft carrier every 30 days, sometimes less. This data presented the Japanese admirals with the mathematical proof that every Japanese vessel sunk was replaced by several American ones, confirming the catastrophic, inescapable truth of their industrial inferiority in the 1940s. One of the most devastating realizations for the Japanese High Command involved air power and pilot training. While America's industrial base was manufacturing planes at an astonishing rate, its parallel training programs were graduating thousands of highly trained pilots monthly through a massive standardized pipeline. In contrast, Japan's training system was collapsing. Due to severe fuel shortages caused by the effective American submarine campaign, Japanese pilot training had been reduced to dangerous minimums, producing pilots who were poorly prepared for combat against the superior numbers and experience of the American air crews. The assessment highlighted that the US had achieved not only industrial supremacy in materials, but also a qualitative edge in human resources, proving that sheer numbers could be matched with quality, a double defeat that was impossible for Japan to overcome in the mid-1940s. The reaction of Japan's top military leaders, faced with this assessment of material reality, was one of quiet, absolute devastation. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard finality. One admiral, upon seeing the steel production figures, was reported to have simply said, "This is not a war of warriors. It is a war of coal and oil. The realization was that Yamato Damashi, the famed warrior spirit, had been rendered obsolete by the sheer unyielding output of American factories. The war was lost not on the decks of the Musashi, but in the sprawling shipyards of Baltimore and Newport News. For the first time, these leaders were forced to articulate the unthinkable. They were fighting an industrial superpower whose capacity to absorb losses exceeded Japan's ability to inflict them. The math was inescapable, signaling the beginning of the end for any rational strategic planning in the 1940s. Further proof of the strategic disparity came not just from ships, but from the systemic failure of the Japanese system to adapt to combat damage. While American engineering developed rapid runway repair techniques to get bombed airfields operational in hours, the Japanese systems for repair were slow and rigid, often requiring weeks of labor. This meant that any airfield the Japanese managed to capture or build was easily neutralized by quick American strikes, while American air bases remained resilient. For Japanese intelligence, this American resilience was yet another manifestation of their overwhelming and incomprehensible material superiority in the 1940s, proving that their initial tactical successes in capturing bases were meaningless against an enemy who could instantly negate any infrastructure damage. The intercepted communications and classified reports also revealed the growing desperation regarding Japanese fuel supplies. Admiral Kurita's fleet at Leyte Gulf had been forced to operate under extremely restrictive fuel consumption protocols. Their planning was dictated not by tactical necessity, but by the dwindling reserves available to them. The American fleet, conversely, was sustained by a massive mobile logistical train that provided seemingly unlimited oil. A desperate message from a staff officer to Tokyo lamented, "We can no longer maneuver with the freedom of the enemy. Our oil tanks are the true limit of our strategy." This fundamental inability to project and sustain power across long distances, due entirely to industrial disparity, was a bitter admission that their grand naval plans had been hollow since the start of the war, a logistical failure made apparent by the massive, fueled-up American fleet in the 1940s. The final, agonizing moment of reckoning was articulated by high-ranking naval officers who had long championed the offensive spirit of the Imperial Navy. Confronted with the photographic evidence and the production graphs, their fatalistic pronouncements were recorded. One general was quoted, through hushed reports, as saying, "We are committed to a fight where the hammer is always in the enemy's hand." This acknowledgement of total loss of initiative, the inability to inflict damage that mattered, was the ultimate concession to American industrial power. Their strategy was broken because the enemy could absorb their most powerful blows and strike back with exponentially greater force. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was not just a loss of ships. It was the psychological collapse that marked the moment. Japan's military elite internally accepted the war was unwinnable on any rational material basis in the 1940s. The devastating realization extended beyond just aircraft and ships to the fundamental raw materials underpinning the war. Intelligence reports forced Japanese admirals to confront the crushing deficit in basic oil and rubber resources. American strategic bombing and submarine warfare had effectively severed Japan's access to vital resource territories in Southeast Asia. The industrial reports presented to the command showed that while the U.S. had limitless reserves and supply lines, Japan was now relying on dwindling domestic stockpiles. This scarcity meant not only less fuel for ships and planes, but also a crippling inability to manufacture necessary tires, engine parts, and communication wire. The shortage of oil, in particular, was so acute that it dictated tactical choices, forcing admirals like Kurita to withdraw at Leyte Gulf simply to conserve the little remaining fuel, cementing the fact that logistics, not bravery, was the final arbiter of naval power in the 1940s. In their private deliberations, the Japanese generals struggled to find a precedent for the war they were fighting. They had expected a classical naval engagement, a decisive Kantai-Kessen, decisive battle, where tactical genius could overcome numerical disadvantage. Instead, they faced a different war, a war of the assembly line. The intercepted American message traffic confirmed the staggering replacement capacity. One report noted that the US could launch a new destroyer in the time it took Japan to complete major repairs on a damaged cruiser. This relentless replacement cycle created an emotional toll, leading to pronouncements that conveyed profound helplessness. A high-ranking staff officer, compiling the loss figures, reportedly muttered, "We are pouring our blood into an American bucket that has no bottom." The sheer weight of American industrial output became the true psychological weapon, eroding the Japanese capacity for hope long before the mainland was invaded. The classified Japanese assessment specifically identified the US system of standardized mass production as the true enemy. The Americans built interchangeable ships, simple aircraft, and utilized modular design elements that allowed for quick assembly and repair. Japan's own industry, while skilled, relied on precision-crafted, unique designs and slower, painstaking construction methods. This comparison underscored the devastating flaw in the Japanese approach. They prioritized qualitative individual superiority over quantitative, replaceable volume. They built swords. America built factories. The data conclusively showed that the US could absorb 5 times the losses of Japanese aircraft or ships and still maintain operational superiority, proving that the industrial doctrine was the ultimate winning strategy in the total war environment of the 1940s. The problem of pilot training, already strained by fuel shortages, was compounded by the quality of American aircraft. The sheer number of superior Grumman Hellcats and other American planes, coupled with the high quality of their radar systems, meant that Japanese pilots, even veterans, were consistently outmatched. The Japanese generals saw the numbers. They could not afford to lose 1 pilot, while the US could afford to lose 3 and still have reserves. The assessment grimly noted the collapse of the Japanese pilot training pipeline, stating that the monthly attrition rate of trained Japanese airmen was several times higher than the replacement rate, a mathematical path leading straight to total aerial defeat. The lack of air cover at Leyte Gulf was the direct physical manifestation of this industrial and training breakdown in the 1940s. The full implications of Leyte Gulf forced the Imperial General Headquarters to reconsider their entire defensive perimeter. The speed and scale of the American fleet meant that the expected multi-month respite after Leyte Gulf evaporated instantly. Commanders were ordered to prepare for the defense of the home islands much sooner than anticipated. This operational shift, documented in frantic staff memorandums, revealed a command structure in panic, rushing to fortify positions that were supposed to have years of preparation time. The generals understood that the sheer velocity of the American advance, fueled by its industrial base, had compressed the remaining timeline of the war, leaving them with no strategic pause to regroup, rebuild, or rearm, making every subsequent battle a matter of desperate, localized defense in the 1940s. The final, agonizing pronouncement, often cited in classified reports, reflected the total intellectual surrender to the figures. Generals who had long advocated for the power of the Bushido Code and fierce resolve now conceded that strategy and spirit were irrelevant against the might of the US economy. One general's personal notes, later recovered, contained the stark reflection: "We believed in the superiority of our courage. They proved the superiority of their assembly line." This admission that the outcome of the Pacific War was fundamentally decided by steel output and oil reserves, rather than heroism or tactics, was the ultimate psychological defeat for Japan's military aristocracy, marking the final acknowledgement that they had provoked a conflict against a type of superpower they were genetically and economically incapable of fighting in the 1940s. The immediate practical consequence of the assessment of material reality was the drastic increase in the deployment of kamikaze units. Faced with an enemy fleet that could not be sunk by conventional means due to its size and rapid replacement capacity, the Japanese High Command authorized the systematic use of suicide tactics. This was a clear, tactical admission of total industrial and air power inferiority. If one conventional bomber could not inflict lasting damage, then the only remaining option was to sacrifice the irreplaceable asset, the pilot, to guarantee the maximum possible damage to the enemy. This descent into sacrificial tactics was a direct, despairing response to the overwhelming, unanswerable industrial might. Witnessed at Leyte Gulf and documented in the resulting intelligence reports of the 1940s. The legacy of this moment, when the Japanese generals finally grasped the true scale of the American Pacific Fleet, is that it redefined naval warfare. The outcome was not decided by one great sea battle, but by the American capacity for sustained industrial attrition. The real war was won by the factory workers and engineers who delivered ships faster than Japan could launch them, and planes faster than Japan could shoot them down. The final recorded words and documents from Tokyo in late 1944 serve as a permanent, chilling testament to the fact that in the 20th century, the ultimate strategic weapon was not the battleship or the bomb, but the relentless, overwhelming power of mass production, which ultimately crushed the Japanese war effort in the 1940s. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, hit the like button and subscribe for more daily content.